This week we present Critiquing Comics, where we discuss comics made and submitted by listeners. First, we rejoin The World of Tomorrow, a comic we discussed the first issue of 5 years ago. This is the one about an actor in roughly the 1950s who stars in a Space Ranger TV show that's on the verge of cancellation. Now, writer Giles Clarke has sent us the second and third issues, and Jason and I take a look at them. Then Adam joins me to discuss the first volume of Prism Stalker by Sloan Leong. It's kind of a psychedelic science fiction book that touches on immigration and other issues, and it's a bit difficult to get into at first. In this episode, you can hear us warm up to the comic even as we're reviewing it. First, we hope you'll spread the word about deconstructing comics and critiquing comics. Tell your friends about us, share episodes on social media, and also send us suggestions for topics we could cover. Email us at mail@deconstructingcomics.com. This is Tim.
This is Jason.
This is Adam.
And this is Critiquing Comics. Welcome to Critiquing Comics. This is Tim in Tokyo with Jason in Portland and a Frankenberry t-shirt. How you doing?
Oh, you can see that, yes. I'm a pure delight from head to toe, Tim. Don't believe the rumors.
Okay, I won't. So we're talking about The World of Tomorrow. Now, the writer, I still don't know how to pronounce his name correctly, Giles Clarke, I imagine it's a soft G. He sent this to us, well, it's been a little while ago now, and apparently he, as well as I, forgot that we had actually talked about the first issue of this 5 years ago, Mulele and I, and that was episode 142 if you want to dig back for it. But he sent us now the first 3 issues of this book, The World of Tomorrow, so I'll briefly recap issue 1, and then we'll talk about issues 2 and 3.
They're all new to me.
Right, yeah, Jason hasn't seen this before. Since Mulele retired from podcasting, I couldn't bring him back into it.
Retired from podcasting?
Yeah,
Is he on a tropical island? How do you retire from podcasting?
He felt like he was spending too much time podcasting and not enough time making comics. So he decided to just completely focus on making comics and not do podcasts at all anymore.
Well, good for him. That makes sense. I understand that. Okay, so he's not retired. It was a lateral move.
Right. I mean, yeah, he quit the podcasting business, but it's not like he's like not working. He's at least making money, whereas in podcasting,
he makes his own comics and he makes money?
Probably a little bit, as opposed to podcasting where there's nothing, but anyway, so this is written and edited by Giles Clarke, pencils and inks by Kenan Halovich, colorist Felipe Obando. I want to say I'm glad that they've been able to keep a consistent creative team together. We've had some books where it's a different artist every issue, and it's really disorienting.
Yeah.
So, and I know it can be tough to keep your artist on board, but fortunately 3 issues and it's still the same 3 people. So,
it's tonally really consistent. I mean, how long has it I guess my question is, how long has it taken for these 3 issues to come out?
Well, I mean, that first issue was 5 years ago.
Okay.
Now, of course, they've been doing, or at least Giles has been working on other books, too. He did remind me that we had talked about the first issue of Rugaru about a year ago. You were in on that one. That was in the Civil War in Louisiana, and there were some horror elements to it.
Yes, Rugaru.
And as I recall, we liked it.
We did. Yeah. We did. And I like this. I just want to say off the top, this is an absolute joy, this book. Tonally, it's a lot of fun. Mm-hmm. After I put these down, I read them so quickly and then went back to just look at some key things. I don't read books that are – I don't see – or maybe they're just not in front of me. But I don't get to see books like this very often where the tone is so – absolutely mirthful and like screwball comedy, like a la The Thin Man or something. It's almost, I would say maybe Galaxy Quest is the closest thing to here, and I'm sure that's not favorable comparison to the creator. You never want to hear those things. but tonally, it's light. It's not dumb, though. It's got stakes. And I was just really, really impressed with it, actually. All three of them feel of the same piece. It had these come out a month apart, a year apart. I don't feel any difference in the material. It's really consistent. And it's largely at a really professional level. Mm-hmm. So I was really quite happy to sit down and read these. I interrupted your recap. Give us the recap.
Yeah, I should say, I agree with you. It's well done. There were a few things that bugged me, but we'll get to those. So to quickly review issue 1, we meet Craig Barstow, who is an actor in a TV show called The World of Tomorrow. It's a kids show about a space ranger type thing. So the setting is something I want to talk about in terms of the time period, but seems to be 1950s sometimes.
I think it's the late 50s. I looked at the TV shows because they talk about Bonanza and Gunsmoke. So Bonanza was about to come out, and that show launched in 1959. Right. They talk about Gunsmoke being passé, and that show started in 1955. However, they also allude to Gilligan's Island. Right,
which didn't start until 64.
Right. But maybe it was in development hell for a couple of years, you know?
Yeah, I mean, it's not on the air yet. They're trying to recruit Tina Louise. But, yeah, I was sort of frustrated by, trying to figure out just when does this take place. And the cars, to me, looked like early 50s. And,
right, well, not everyone could afford an upgrade.
Well, sure. And also, so this... The World of Tomorrow TV show is broadcast live, and I'm not sure how late they were doing live broadcasts of scripted TV shows.
If you want to hold this up to reality, we're going to have a tough time.
Yes.
But I agree, some of the real-world things don't line up, but, I sort of gave it that Once Upon a Time in Hollywood brush, where it's within 10 years of each other. Maybe the live TV, not so much, but I went with it. Nothing stuck out is no one had an iPod, or no one was using modern slang.
Watching Cheers or something, that would have been really confusing.
Yeah. The details are, you have to look at them a little bit hazy because you need the live TV aspect for the plot to make sense.
Right, yes. So the show is going to be canceled, and Craig has had trouble with gambling and drinking. He gets locked out of his dressing room, and then it's just one thing after another happens to him. He gets in a fight with the tough guy neighbor, confronted by his loan shark, Mr. Z, who then has his men toss Craig into traffic. He's hit by 2 cars, and issue 1 is over. And so that was where we dropped off 5 years ago because we only had the first issue. So in issue 2, now, I don't know, it kind of takes a left turn here. So Craig now is under some kind of illusion that he is actually his character from the TV show, Captain Cal Armstrong. And he's actually in some outer space science fiction environment. And he's seeing everything, as if it were that and not seeing, the reality. He mistakes a city bus for a Maldivian prison transport and hijacks it, throws the driver off the bus, and he sees him as this alien. And this young actor that he met before on the set in issue 1, Johnny Redshirt, happens to be on the bus, but he can't get through to Craig that they're not in space. When the issue is... This goes on for most of the issue, and then near the end, Craig kind of snaps out of it and realizes he's running late for his appointment with Mr. Friesman, who... I need a little bit of reminding who Mr. Friesman was. He's the producer of the TV show, but I thought it would have been useful, since this is a different issue, to somehow remind the audience who Mr. Friesman is.
Yeah, you have to read them concurrently.
Yeah.
But it is set up in the first issue that he has a lunch that he doesn't want to meet.
Yes, it is. But, I think as being a different issue, yeah.
I'll also point out, he has been hit by 2 cars.
Yeah, that's what I want to know. Why is not every bone in his body broken?
Well, I think he has to be concussed minimally.
Well,
if not a hematoma about to pop out of his head. So I took the allusions to the space world as part of his head injury.
Okay.
That he sustained hitting by 2 cars, and also alcoholism. So if you're an alcoholic, you're already working under a filter of reality. Trust me on that one. And then you're hit by 2 cars. Yeah, it would be helpful to be like, "Ow, my head's killing me." But I assume that's what it is, as opposed to the realism that he should be pancake.
Yeah. How is he actually walking around?
Well, I've been hit by a car. You don't feel it right away. Sometimes the next day you wake up in agony. The whiplash settles in. So we'll have to see what happens in the future. But you're right. The pacing is madcap. It is more hijinks than plot development, and it is moving at a leisurely pace. But I think that's part of the charm and part of the genre. It's not a tightly wound script. So, but you mentioned Johnny Redshirt. And the fictional captain is Captain Colonel Armstrong. Captain Armstrong is an on the nose name, but Johnny Redshirt is like that's the writer reaching through the comic and smacking you across the face. Yeah. So that was that issue too. But like the art is consistently good. The writing is good. I would say sometimes the writing is characters will talk in a formal voice. So Craig will say in the first issue how nobody was injured, as opposed to saying no one was hurt. Almost everyone will use the proper terminology, which sometimes in dialogue feels unrealistic. But they could be. It's also the 50s where people were probably a little bit more formal. Okay, that's issue 2. Do you want to give them the plot of issue 3?
Well,
or do you want to talk about things that bother you?
I was thinking maybe we'd talk about things about it. In issue 3, he does get to meet up with the producer, and then he has a relapse, and things go nuts from there. So I went back and listened to the podcast from 5 years ago where Mulele and I talked about the first issue, and we wondered if it was a good idea to name the comic after the TV show, because the kind of having it be the same kind of made the expectation be that this is a science fiction comic. That it would actually be like the content of the TV show rather than being about the down-and-out actor from the TV show. I don't know. What do you think?
I think sometimes it is the TV show. Sometimes it is that reality when his head injury comes back into play.
Yeah.
I like the simplicity of it. I think if you can take, and I've done this myself, like in past tense, my character works at a company called Past Tense. Originally, it was called something else. I'm like, why am I having just another name to remember? Like, let's just simplify it. I did a book years ago called Continuity, and she was addicted to a drug, and I made up some crazy name for it. And then my publisher was like, why don't you just call the drug Continuity? And I was like, oh my God, you're right. It just simplifies things. And this is in the 50s, we had this idea of the world of tomorrow that we know didn't come true. So I have what else could you call it? Armstrong?
I think getting, now that we're seeing these delusions that he's having in the second and third issues, it's making a little bit more sense to me to call the comic that, because that science fiction environment is still intruding into the comic, even though the TV show is not being shot.
I think it gives it some an optimistic place to go. Like, things are really bad for this guy. Like, he owes money to the mob. His show is getting canceled. He's clearly been divorced. He's getting smacked around by his neighbor. Like, this guy is low, low, low. Calling it the world of tomorrow is sort of like, it's a wry look at where he is now. Like, nobody would want to be in his life. That's not the fantasy. So I actually like the name. I would keep it.
Yeah. Well, and depending on where the story goes, it could end up having a second meaning, talking about his own tomorrow, and maybe we'll see his future turn around, rather than it being the title of the TV show.
I do want to draw your attention. There was one illustration that totally took me out of the book. For the most part, this is really consistent and it's really strong. But occasionally the scale of characters is off. So when he is hit by a car at the end of issue 1, the character, is taller than the car is long. It's like way, it's not even like a little bit off. It is like stylistically, you would have to just say it's a stylistic choice, but he is like a giant compared to the car. Or it could be the way it's colored, or maybe he's flying towards us, but it looks like he's falling on the car, and he is.
Yeah,
like
you're talking about the first car.
The first car.
Yeah, I assumed that he was being thrown into the air towards us, and that was why he looked so big. But you could read the drawing as being that he's a giant and he's lying on the car. And we've got the sound effect of the hit. Wham is right there. So I don't know. You could read it different ways.
I think you're right. I read it the wrong way. And I just think the color palette, maybe the coloring could have been different to differentiate him from the background.
Yeah, it needed to somehow add, to show the dimensions there. The same as when he's hit the second time and he's thrown in the air, and we can see clearly because it's from a completely different angle.
Right. Okay. So that makes sense. And also in issue 2, there was something with the bus shows up and he thinks it's a prison transport, but the way it's colored, both the transport and the background are like they seem to be on the same layer. It was really hard for me to even know what I was looking at first. So I think like the spaceship should be not so muted if it's in the foreground, because the background is muted. So everything is muted in that. It's in page 6 on the second one. And these are minor nitpicks. But there, a couple of the coloring choices, I was like, I'm not sure. I really had to think about the illustration and where everyone was in relationship to each other. And this happens like 2 or 3 times over the course of all 3 issues. There's also a fight scene in issue 3 where his arm is like as long as 2 arms would be put together. It's like an incredibly long arm that I initially was like, what am I? I'm not sure what I'm looking at.
Okay.
Again, these are minor nitpicks.
Well, I mean, we have to really hunt for things to complain about in this comic because it's mostly quite good.
Yeah, it is quite good. Okay, it's on page 18 of the third one, panel 1. The arm is like it's like a Mr. Fantastic arm.
Oh, the twack panel?
Yeah. Look at the arm on that.
Yeah.
Occasionally, if you do that consistently, it's a stylistic choice. If you do it occasionally, it does make you stop and say, "Wait, what am I looking at?" But the lettering is on point. The coloring, for the most part, is on point. Like the following panel on that page is colored in a really smart way, where the foreground elements are bright, and then the background elements have like a bit of a filter on them. They're a bit hazy, so you know that's a deep focus of what you're looking at. The car wreck scene, the deep focus wasn't as successful. But you're right. I think I was looking at it the wrong way. Okay, so my question here is, the plot of this is moving pretty slow, but that's the Madcap style of it. It's more about the fun of the adventure than getting to the end of it, and that the conflict does escalate throughout. Like he's getting in more and more trouble with his studio, and Johnny Redshirt's along for the ride, and then it ends where it looks like they're in peril. So I guess my question is, how long is this going to be, and how long is it going to take to produce?
Yeah, well, apparently just 3 issues in 5 years, so that's a long time to wait for the next installment.
Right. So I would, I think it's good. I would focus on this and get it out the door, because it is strong. I think it's stronger than the other book that he sent us. I just think I don't see a lot of comics like this. So it was just like a joy to read. It's a world I don't spend a lot of time in. 50s Hollywood. The sci-fi element of it is, we've seen this before, where someone thinks they're in one reality, but they're also in our reality. But it still works. It's got a charm to it. I do think it would be helpful if Johnny Redshirt didn't have such like a similar hair color to our main guy. Because when they're in the same panel, I mean, one is obviously older and a little bit more frazzled, but maybe I think if you're making a comic book with two similarly heighted white guys with brown hair, make one of them a blonde, or give one of them curly hair, or just to make them look different in silhouette and shape.
Right. Well, then on the cover of the first issue, there was another figure, I think is that tough guy neighbor, but I couldn't, he's also, there are differences, but at first looking at it, I thought it was the same person, but okay, I guess I see he's got shorter hair and a tougher face and everything, but I could have used a little bit more difference between the two of them.
I also thought that character on the right, the neighbor, was a different version of him. I know people. Here's the problem: in the 50s, everyone kind of did have the same haircut. You're not going to get somebody with a beard or
tattoos.
There is
jewelry.
His tough guy. So his tough guys kind of all have the same haircut too. They have like that buzz cut. So the character in the top right of the cover, and there's a character in the bottom right of the front cover, and that guy's hair is just like a lighter color. Yeah, the 50s were boring. You're not going to find a guy with a scarf around his neck and a ponytail. So that's kind of what you're dealing with. So the other thing I thought was a choice that they could have made is that when we open the book in issue 1, we're watching The World of Tomorrow on TV. And everything has like a sepia tone to mimic how it might look in black and white on TV at the time. When he goes into his head injury vision of the sci-fi world, it would be interesting if that was colored a different way, or if he saw it on TV, or maybe if the panels didn't have a border to them, just to help make it really dial in that we're in a different reality.
Yeah, they're all just in the same kind of panel, and you just have to figure out from the picture itself whether it's his illusion or reality.
And in reality, he's all scuffed up, and in his illusion, his costume is also kind of scuffed up, which means you just have to pay close attention as you're reading. So if I was doing it, I would have made those borderless panels or kept them in the sepia tone of the TV show. But it's a minor thing. It's his choice. Johnny Redshirt.
Yeah, or there are a variety of things you could do, but yeah.
Yeah. You also, story clarity is key. Can you follow it? And I can absolutely follow all of this. These are just little things that I would think that if I was making this book, I would just make the lead character and his supporting character have different hair.
Yeah. Okay.
But, I hope to see more of this. This was a lot of fun to read. And, we found the 3 things to nitpick. Did you have another nitpick?
No, I'm out of nitpicks. Well, there were a few typos in the dialogue. I was just noticing. Now I'm getting really nitpicky here, but I just noticed while we were talking, the final page of issue 3, the box at the bottom says, "Stayed tuned for episode 4 of The World of Tomorrow." That ED got in there errantly somehow. But... and there are a few other places like that, but so just need to check the lettering a little bit.
Oh, yeah. Stay tuned. Well, you bring up, that's an interesting point because Giles is his writer. He's the writer and he's the editor.
And that didn't work out so well when Marvel did it that way in the 70s.
Well, none of us are Marvel in the 70s. They had access to much better drugs. But I think part of the reason that why you have someone else be your editor is that it's a different perspective looking over your work to catch things that you might not catch, not just for typos, but just stylistically. And we all come from different places socioeconomically and our beliefs, values. It's good to have someone who's not you look over your work in the script phase and just point out possibilities you hadn't thought of, just to help make the work as clear as it can be. So my editor on Past Tense, Brett Israel, he made a few suggestions in the script phase that were critical, that really helped make the book better than it was. So if you can, and I know it's a big ask to have someone read your work and give notes, but it does help avoid redundancies. And if you may have a weak spot in your dialogue or in your characterization, someone who's not you would make a good editor.
Mm-hmm.
So I would. Obviously, Giles is producing these books on his own, and they're of a really high quality. This is like the third. I mean, for 4 books now we've seen from him that are really high quality, self-produced. But here's the thing: no one can do it all. Like, you do need help. So he's doing an astounding job on his own. But it might be helpful to just have someone else who's not like in your family or in your household with a different perspective read the scripts.
Yeah, not your mom.
No.
It's very
Mine's
nice, dear.
Well, or like a family member or like a partner, because they all want to see you succeed, and they'll probably have the same blind spots that you do. My wife has not read one of my books in forever because she's heard me talk about them all forever. She feels like she's already read them. She's already tired of them and having not even read them. So, no, I work with a couple of different people. Or I'll send it out to another writer. My friend Adrienne Ambrose is a novelist, and she's really good about reading things and making like just a small suggestion that really, really helps elevate the work. But Giles is doing a great job. He seems like a one-man band. So I'm really happy to see it. I think if you can kickstart your way through a story like this, work on multiple projects, and not wait for a publisher to knock on your door and say, hey, what do you got? I think I appreciate the entrepreneurial spirit of what Giles is doing, and I can't say that I'm tired of reading stories like this. I'm not. It's really fun.
Yeah,
it's a lot of fun. Yeah, I would check it out. Check out if you have the opportunity. Where can we find World of Tomorrow, Tim?
Well, I noticed it was in previews, so apparently it's going into comic shops. I couldn't find it on Comixology, but you can get paper comics of this where paper comics are sold, apparently.
Okay, so Comixology has become a tough marketplace since it was absorbed into the Amazon catalog. It was absorbed into the Kindle library, and it is not the same experience as it was. So as someone who used to have many, I used to have all of my titles on Comixology, and I did well on there. Since it moved to Kindle, it's died. It doesn't package or showcase comics in the same light as it did. We all have to re-upload all of our books, and I haven't bothered. Yeah, so that could be why we're not seeing them there. But does he have a website? It's TBD.
Yeah, I was looking yesterday. I did not find one. It looks like he's got Twitter and Instagram or whatever. But
all right, well, where can people follow him on Instagram? Yeah, You're right. I'm looking at the letter pages, and I don't see a website either. But it's Uncharted Wilderness Studios. And you can find them at Uncharted Wilderness Studios on Instagram and at unchartedwildernessstudio.com. So Uncharted Wilderness.
Okay.
Yeah. Hopefully they have paper copies that you can buy there. I'm sure this is probably kickstarted or somehow funded. And I hope now that they've got distribution through Diamond, I hope they get to finish the book or continue it. I hope it goes on. Yeah. I can see this being a really solid 6-issue miniseries, 6 or 8 issues. At the pace it's going, it would just make a great madcap comedy. So, well done to everybody involved.
Coming up, the art is great, but what about the story? Adam and I discuss Sloan Leong's Prism Stalker.
Are you Batman? Oh, you must be, because that's Robin. Hi, Robin.
Yes, Batman and Robin are here, and Tim and Paul are also here to evaluate the Batman TV show that took the nation by storm in 1966.
How in the name of purple wombats did they manage that?
To the Bat Polls podcast looks at the writing, the music, the guest stars, how the show fit into its times, and much more. Look for it wherever you get podcasts or at tothebatpolls.libsyn.com. Why, listening to the Bat Polls even makes Season 3 enjoyable.
Gosh, yes, Batman. When you put it that way.
Okay, we're back, and now I'm with Adam. How you doing?
I'm all right here down in the armpit of Japan, as it's colloquially referred to as.
Nagoya?
Yeah, it's hot and stinky and humid.
Yeah.
But-
for sure.
Yeah. How's everything up there in Tokyo?
Yeah, about the same.
All right.
Hot and humid. Next week, well, but by the time people hear it, it'll be this week. But I'm going to the U.S. for a few weeks, so to New Hampshire. So it's going to be a little bit cooler there compared to here.
What is in New Hampshire?
My whole family lives there now. Nobody lives in Iowa anymore. Long story.
That's funny. Like, I was trying to think of two states that I have absolutely no knowledge or any like context at all to like, I don't know, understand. And I think it would be Delaware and New Hampshire are the two that I have absolutely there's no image in my mind at all of what they might be like. So, so you're from what?
Do you have an image of Vermont, but not New Hampshire?
Yeah, sort of. Yeah, I don't know if my image of Vermont is correct or not, but what I imagine it being like is sort of like the south of the north, like a lot of, like a lot of mullets and stuff like that, but also like it being very kind of progressive and left leaning in a lot of ways. So I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, I'm not sure, and I'm not that familiar with it. I have been to New Hampshire once before, but like for a few days. Anyway, so we are talking about a comic called Prism Stalker. This is written and drawn by a woman named Sloan Leong, with letters by Ariana Maher. So, briefly, the story starts out, there's a young woman named Vepira, or Vep, she's usually called, and now I think I've got this figured out. I read the first, couple chapters maybe 3 times. She and some other humans were taken from a planet called Inama, which had apparently become dangerous. She mentions a sickness. Later, chapter 3, it's mentioned that there was a terrorist attack. But it seems like also something had made the water poisonous there. So then these refugees were picked up and then kept by these aliens on an asteroid. But the young people were kind of separated from their parents. And then Vep is basically forced to enter what's referred to as a newly formed chorus academy to nurture settlements on a newly discovered planet. Which means that these people have to learn fighting techniques. And there are all these kind of weird fighting techniques with some made-up vocabulary. Some of the words I didn't figure out what they meant. So Sloan sent us the first 2 volumes because the second one came out on July 4th and she was looking for promotion of that.
Okay.
The first volume is 168 pages, including an essay and an interview in the back, and the second one's 164. First one published by Image, second one by Dark Horse, was kind of interesting. I'm not sure. I'd like to know the story is there. Since we've never talked about the first one, we decided to start there and then adhere to the old Critiquing Comics guideline, which is we'll read the first 30 pages and more if we like it. I did end up reading the entire first volume except for the back matter. But we were communicated a little bit ahead of time about this, and I think we both kind of struggled with this story, and I wouldn't say it's bad. It's been very well reviewed by some others. Maybe we're just not the audience for it. It feels like it's aimed at somebody much younger than I am, like maybe 40 years younger.
Yeah, I get that feeling too. Or maybe it's not just an age thing, but just because it doesn't fit in any particular category. Like it's science fiction, I guess, but it's also very psychedelic. And it's also, like there's I think that people like you and I who probably grew up in more of a time where you put things into certain categories and say, this is, I like
genres,
I like goth stories or whatever. I think now it tends to be more open where people kind of, embrace the sort of hodgepodge kind of thing, so.
But I think part of what caused me to struggle with it is that it's so heavy on the world building, and it felt to me like there wasn't all that much story. Not so much plot. It's just, building the world and, filling us in on all these various aspects of it. And I have to take my hat off to Sloan for her imagination in designing these alien characters. So many different character designs.
I definitely got the impression when I was reading this, I wasn't sure actually if it was like a team who was doing it or if it was a one-man show or whatever, but I did get the impression like this is very much an art-driven book, an art-first kind of book where, the artist has these worlds they want to draw and create, I don't know, certain visuals and stuff. So,
she's doing both so she can write the story in a way that she can show off her art as much as possible.
Right. Yeah.
Really cooperating with herself well.
Exactly. And you can always tell a book where the writer is just writing how they want and they don't care. They're not considerate of how the art's supposed to look because then the art tends to be kind of forced. In this one, it's very natural. The two go together perfectly. So it totally makes sense that it's one person's vision when I see this now because, the story totally fits with the art very seamlessly. So, I mean, like you said, the art is super, it's really, I don't even know how to say it. Like there is a certain sort of psychedelic thing to it, but not in that kind of weird, it's not like in a 60s hippie kind of way. It's more like informed by those kind of art school comics. I'm thinking of like Michael DeForge and stuff like that were popular in the like 2010s and stuff. It also has like influences from like later Cartoon Network kind of animation, like I don't know, like Adventure Time and stuff like that to an extent without being so silly. So I feel like there's a lot of like younger influences in this, especially the way color is being played with and stuff. It has very, very modern sensibilities, I feel like. And that totally goes along with the story because the story is not super linear. It's almost like it moves along at the speed of thought, like it moves along with the writer's attention span and maybe with the reader's attention span. I don't know. But, and I feel like maybe that's what you and I were not picking up on because maybe I'm more inclined to read a very kind of more linear kind of story. Mm-hmm. And I felt like this one was more, I guess it was more like situational or like creating a mood and a feeling a lot of the time, even though there is a story for sure.
Yeah, as I kept reading, I could see a little bit more actual story happening and Vep's trials and tribulations of this training that she has to go through and how she seems to be falling behind and she's in danger of being kicked out of the program, but then she would just have to be a worker on this planet for the rest of her life. She couldn't go home for kind of complicated reasons. But so yeah, I did start to see, okay, there's some kind of a story here. It's not entirely world building, but yeah, it seemed like each chapter there wasn't. The summary would be quite short as far as plot developments.
Yeah, that's true. There's no like chunky bits you can really bite into. It's like you're right. It's not a lot of substance to the story a lot of the time. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of cool too. Like it's cool to create a feeling and a vibe and an atmosphere and this whole world. And she does a very excellent job at that. Like there's no mistaking the fact that there's a very particular world that these characters live in. In a space. So,
yeah, I mean, I'm looking at the art here, just kind of scrolling through again, and yeah, there's a lot of interesting color to it, and there's some kind of weird fight scenes and just weird things happening, and I never got lost. I mean, that's always kind of something that we watch for in critiquing comics is could I understand what was happening or was it clear as mud? And I mean, to some extent, I think you're not quite supposed to know what's happening in some scenes, but in terms of the art, I didn't feel lost. I was following it and actually kind of digging it. I kind of was wishing for a little bit more substantial story, but
yeah, I agree. I mean, you get to the end of book 1 and you're not, like you said, you could sum it up very quickly. You could say, I mean, you just did. You said, she's a refugee from a planet, and then she's sent on this mission to colonize another world. And that kind of really sums up what the first book is about. But, I mean, it's an interesting, it is a story, the setting and all of that is something that I haven't really seen before. I haven't seen a character who comes from this particular type of situation. I haven't seen them be, put in these particular types of trials, even though it does sort of follow like the basic rules of sci-fi, or like even a Joseph Campbell kind of story, because you have a character who doesn't really know what she's doing. She doesn't really know the world around her. And that's how we as the audience get to experience this world, is by seeing her discover it. And so, that's kind of a cool device. But like I said, I don't think that I've seen this particular type of story told before, which is fresh,
I'm wondering kind of what her overall kind of point or idea is here. In this, as the story started, I wondered if it was like inspired by problems with the American immigration system. But then I went back and looked at her email where, she was, of course, focusing on the second volume, which, sorry, Sloan, neither of us got to because we were focusing on the first one. But the blurb for the second one, called The Weeping Star, says, Weeping Star follows Vep and her fellow students as they begin to subdue the unruly planet bent on scouring their new society from its surface. But what exactly are they subjugating, and what will the cost of conquering be? So it seems like it's getting more into kind of colonization or invasion, or kind of brings to mind some various things that have happened in the world in the past several decades. So she seems, I think has some kind of point to the whole thing, but not quite sure what it is yet.
I definitely made a note to myself about that. Like, without having read her comments, I definitely got that. The note that I wrote down to myself was that, these people talk a lot about how their language was taken away from them, and which robbed them of their identity as people, and they didn't have words for places and things because of this new place. And a lot of the language that they were using there made me think of the African slave trade, the transatlantic slave trade. Mm-hmm. And like you're talking about this colonization and using colonized people against other colonized people and stuff. Mm-hmm. I think there's definitely a lot of echoes of that in this. It reminds me of something I read once when they were talking about World War I and how Germany was late to the game in terms of like colonization. So, like England had spread out their colonies all over the world. France had spread out, they had colonies all over the world. Spain had, but Germany didn't really form as a nation until like 1890 or something like that. And so when they get to the World War I, all these German, like Bavarian soldiers are marching, and they have to fight against, like hussars and like all these like soldiers from Africa and from India and from the whole world's pool of soldiers that they've never seen before. And so that kind of like idea of just like, one kind of culture controlling and dominating all these other areas, and, and not really for any particular purpose or any clear purpose, definitely made me think of of colonization.
Mm-hmm. I have to admit, the first time when I first started reading this and I read like the first 2 chapters, I kind of didn't like it. I felt like, the language is all kind of flowery and I can't really understand what's going on. And I was just sort of annoyed by it. And then I thought, well, I'm going to go back, before I finish reading the book, I'm just going to go back to the beginning and read these first 2 chapters again. And then it kind of started making more sense to me since I had seen what came a little bit later and started to piece together what was happening. And then it became easier to read and I wasn't annoyed by it anymore. So that might be a good approach to reading it. If you try to start reading it and you don't like it at first, go back and reread what you just read, and I think it'll come together. Her email mentions this is to be a trilogy of volumes, so it's one more book after these two. So to your previous comment, I didn't necessarily feel annoyed by it by any means, but I did feel like it really starts to take off once she's actually sent off and stuff. Like, there's a lot of things where it's kind of creating this backstory so that you understand the character's values and things like that, and so I could see how that would annoy certain people. It's kind of like every new Marvel movie has to go tell the origin story again. Every single Spider-Man movie tells the origin story again. Uncle Ben, radioactive spider. Yeah. Anyway, go ahead. So in that regard, maybe I could see how there's a lot of kind of build up before anything really starts to happen. But there are some really, really inventive and like creative ideas in this. Like the idea that all the flora and fauna in the world that she's going to is part of some psychic network where they communicate with each other and send signals back and forth. And even being on that planet, you have also access to that. And so learning to use it to your advantage and stuff. That's such a cool concept because it makes the whole planet alive in a sense. And, I think there's a part where she starts getting confused because the planet or the network of all living things on this planet can absorb all of those things and mix it up and send it back to you. And that's like the planet's defense system against invasion or invaders or whatever is, to kind of confuse and, frustrate people and stuff. So I thought some of those ideas are really, really cool. I almost wonder if the ideas for the different worlds and the different creatures and stuff kind of came first before the story. I'm not sure, but yeah, there's some cool ideas there. It almost reminds me of Orson Scott Card. Is that his name? The guy who wrote Ender's Game and all those things. He has like super, super cool creative ideas about how each planet has totally different biology and evolution. So they would have just entirely different ways of, reproducing and everything like that. So it reminds me of that without all the racism and sexism and everything that comes along with Orson Scott Card. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I think I've really come around on this book, like from hating it when I first started reading it to now I'm actually kind of interested in reading that second volume. Maybe we can come back to it after my vacation.
Yeah, actually, I got to the end of the first book and I was also thinking the same thing. Like, it's definitely, the art is absolutely gorgeous, and I can talk about that in just a second, but the art is really, really pretty, and the story is very interesting. It didn't catch me as a story, but like the ideas in it really, really caught my attention, and I would be really happy to read the second volume. Yeah, actually, I'm sorry to kind of jump around back and forth, but I just mentioned a second ago the Orson Scott Card comment, which made me remember something that I wanted to say about this book, and that is that I don't know if this is deliberate or not, but I would guess that it is. The protagonist has a very kind of almost androgynous name, and the character itself is not. It's almost like genderless. I guess it's supposed to be female, but it's kind of not clear either way. And the same thing, it's not clear what race the person is either, and it's just kind of like a mix or like, you know what I mean? And I think that was really cool. Like, I feel like I'm not using very good, like, I'm not phrasing this very well, but I
can't speak good,
but I did. Yeah. Can't talk real good, but I did feel like I feel like that's something that I see more and more in younger people's comics as things like, non-binary and, like genderqueer kind of things become more in the forefront and become more normalized for people and stuff. And also as a lot of cultures are sort of like blending in more, like we went from like, I know that people always say America's like a melting pot, but it's more like a salad bar. And I feel like more and more it is actually kind of melting together, and you see a lot more cultures sort of actually genuinely blending together and stuff. And so that comes out in art like this, where you see a mix of lots of different cultural influences. And also I think, the gender identities and things like that are also, not like, this is definitely not like a story specifically for boys or a story specifically for girls. It's just an all, I don't know if all ages, because it does have some violence to it, but not really. It's basically all ages, all gender, all race. Like it's anybody could come to this story and enjoy it. So, so it's a very cool, inclusive kind of thing.
Yeah, I found on Sloan's website that she herself is very multicultural. Hawaiian, Chinese, Italian, Mexican, Native American, and European ancestries. So that's just kind of, she's a world citizen, basically. She's, it's hard to categorize her. It's just like it's hard to categorize her comic.
Yeah, and that I think that's something that's very Hawaiian in general. Like, it's such a mixed society there of like, Portuguese and Japanese and Korean and Native Hawaiian and stuff like that. But so that explains maybe why why there's so much creativity in the world building and stuff like that, because she comes from that kind of background where everything's here and everything's cool, so yeah. So I did want to talk a little bit about the art, unless you have more to talk about the story.
Go ahead.
So I feel like the artwork there is a lot of really, like, I feel like Sloan went to art school. There's a lot of really, like, a lot of the pen marks and stuff are just very much like it's a finished art piece on its own. There's some parts where like the things start to fall apart and it becomes almost like these gestural scribbles and stuff. But it's still expressing some action or some movement. There's parts where I even wrote down certain things to like the PDF I had didn't have any page numbers, so I can't say exactly where these were from, but there's a part where the proctor is giving an academic evaluation, like when these people come in, and in that scene, it's very, very abstract. There's like these gradients that intentionally kind of clash with each other, but in a really cool looking way and not like a harsh way. There's a certain page where all these hands are coming down and pointing towards her. I think these big like pink hands, and there's like bodies. There's like a body falling, and it has like kind of different, like it's a time lapse of a body falling through a space and stuff like that. And just all of it just looks really, really like, yeah, it looks like a finished art piece, and maybe not necessarily just comics illustration, but like there's definitely a background to creating, interesting looking art.
Well, that's interesting that you say you think she went to art school, because her website says that she's self-taught. So,
okay, that's cool. Yeah, that makes it even more interesting to me, because I don't know, it's like like that she has that kind of sensibility just naturally. I wonder where she picked that stuff up, because there are quite a few scenes like that where I was like, okay, this is cool. Like, 'cause it will just change style suddenly, especially towards the end. I think in chapter 5 of the first book, there's some scenes where when the character is experiencing a lot of like, I don't know, turmoil or stress or something, like it starts changing art styles quickly. It'll change to, like I said, quite literally like almost scribbles that just kind of indicate shapes and stuff. And then the outlines, it'll go like, a lot of the scenes will show like, it's like a black outline with like pretty clear defined colors. And then all of a sudden the actual outlines will be in purple or in blue or something like that, which creates this really dynamic look. So yeah, like the way that the artwork changes but still contains her style is very, very cool. Very, very impressive to me.
Yeah.
And I think I may have mentioned, I think that the colors really do a lot of the heavy lifting in this because they're just like, without even looking at the details, as you turn the pages, it's just these bright, really nice looking gradients that just kind of please the eye. So there's a lot of good color work too. So that surprises me that she hasn't been trained, because she has a very clear understanding of color theory.
Yeah, cool. Okay. So, yeah, we ended up talking a lot longer about this than we expected to before we started. So, yeah, but I'll link to her website in the show notes, and we'll probably get to the second volume later on after I get back from the U.S.
All right, yeah, count me in on that.
You can help the Deconstructing Comics family of podcasts and get bonus content by joining us on Patreon at patreon.com/deconcomics. And go to deconstructingcomics.com to connect to us on Twitter, Facebook, or YouTube, to shop on Amazon to support the show, and to find links to subscribe to the podcast. You can comment on any episode there or drop us a line at mail@deconstructingcomics.com. That's also the address for submitting your own comics work for possible inclusion on Critiquing Comics, or to make a donation via PayPal. Our theme is from bensound.com. August is Love and Rockets Month. While I'm on vacation, we'll be re-presenting 4 vintage episodes relating to Jaime and Gilbert Hernandez's long-running series. Next week, in an episode from 2011, Kumar and I are joined by the late great Tom Spurgeon to discuss the work of Jaime Hernandez, focusing on the books Maggie the Mechanic, The Girl from Hoppers, and Perla La Loca. Till then, this is Tim, and thanks for listening to Critiquing Comics.